You want to jump in?
Yeah, would you like me to go ahead and get started? All right.
Go for it.
I have
Come over here. So
I know, I feel like
it's a really weird setup.
I know, and I hope, folks, I moved over here just for now so that the folks online can see me. So. This is actually, this is a longer slide deck. I had presented this, gosh, I don't know, October or November. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, I promise. I have 3 slides that I'm going to just entertain you with today, not the entire deck, I promise. So pardon while I just manage to move through to a few slides. So I was asked by the co-chairs and by the staff just to give a quick overview of edTPA, kind of situate you into what edTPA looks like and how it works. And then I'll be happy to, I'll stay here and happy to answer any questions as you're working through this process today. So through edTPA, candidates are collecting, they're identifying and collecting subject-specific evidence of their teaching from a learning segment that consists of 3 to 5 lessons. So it's kind of a snapshot in a period of time. So they identify those lessons on their own, and they're going to collect their evidence and cultivate their evidence from within those 3 to 5 lessons. The lessons come from a unit of instruction for one class of students. So this might be 4th period math or 3rd period PE. But all of their work for those 3 to 5 lessons comes from that one class. Candidates have guidelines and requirements of things that they are submitting, but they also have commentaries that are there and they're structured. You'll see them in the files, the materials you have access to. They have questions that are sort of preloaded, if you will. So reflection questions for candidates to respond to. And through those responses, what they're doing is providing a rationale to support those instructional practices. And everything in those responses, everything that the candidate is asked to do, is really to draw them back to identifying the learning strengths and learning needs of their students and responding to those. So preparing for those, planning for those through the first task, which is planning, actually delivering on those in the second task, which is instruction, and then assessing their students' learning of the content of that learning segment in the third task. So I talked a little bit about those tasks, and here they are. And again, I know I showed this earlier, but it's sort of the image that we kind of tend to use when we talk about edTPA. Looking at student learning and everything from and about edTPA centering on student learning. You see those 3 circles, planning, instruction, and assessment. Those 3 circles that you see represent the 3 tasks of edTPA. So the first one being planning, that's the intended teaching. All of us have been teachers. I won't say how old my last group of kindergartners are now, but they're out of school, that's for sure. But we've all been classroom teachers. We know we plan things. We sit at home, we're planning lessons, and we're like, this is going to be great. And we get there and we're like, that was not what I thought was going to happen today. And so planning is very much the intended teaching. It's what they want to and what they plan to teach based on what they know about their students. And in those commentary prompts that you review, you'll see that. In the handbook, you'll see that. It's really about what do you know about your students' needs, their assets, and why are you planning lessons to support those? How and why are you planning lessons to support those? The instruction task is task 2. This is the enacted instruction. So this is actually what they teach. This is where the video clips of their interactions with and among their students come into play. So this is their actual taking of their lesson plans and actually teaching. And then the third task is the assessment task. So this is where the candidates are taking some work that the students have done within that learning segment and analyzing it. They're analyzing it on really 2 levels. They're analyzing it for the whole class, looking at both qualitative and quantitative patterns of performance. looking at things and identifying what students have done well, what they have clearly learned, and what they have not done well on, what they are continuing to struggle with or struggling to learn. Candidates at this point are also selecting 3 focus learners. Those focus learners are the 3 students for whom they are providing evidence of their work. So they're selecting a work sample that those 3 students completed. The whole class completed it, but they're selecting these 3 focus learners. They're analyzing what that performance on that assessment tells them about those students. So they're analyzing the whole class kind of broadly, but they're analyzing the performance and the learning of these 3 focus learners more deeply. So they're really driving down and really thinking about what does the way that this student performed on this assessment, what does it tell me about the learning associated with these objectives and what this lesson was all about. So that's the assessment task. Through the kind of pieces on the side, the words on the side, you can see the constructs that connect the 3 tasks. And so the first one is academic language. And this is really understanding that language is the vehicle by which we're learning. And so is the candidate supporting the language demands of that lesson? When folks from the field ask me for an example of this, I give an example, and I'll share it with you just to help contextualize this a little bit. When our son was in 2nd grade, he came home one day and he was talking about I said, "How did school go today?" And he pulled out a Venn diagram and he said, "We did this." And I said, "Oh my gosh, you were comparing and contrasting." And his little head kind of tipped to the side and his eyes got squinty. He's like, "I don't know what that means." And I was like, "Well, tell me what you did." And he could talk all about how his teacher read 2 stories and they were comparing the 2, and he used the word similar. How are they alike and how are they not alike? So he fundamentally understood what comparing and contrasting was, right? That you're identifying how they're similar, how they're not, but he couldn't use that word. That the words comparing and contrasting meant nothing to him. And so that's really what this academic language is all about, identifying the candidate, identifying what constructs, what words are students going to struggle with, and how can I prepare in advance? How can I think about what those are before I even teach and use those during my teaching? And then in the assessment task, how does their use of academic language tell me about what they know? So in Spencer's case, he understood conceptually what comparing and contrasting was. He didn't understand the exact terminology. And so if he had gone to another class or another teacher and that teacher had said, "Today we're going to compare and contrast," he probably wouldn't have known what to do. He didn't have that language, but he did understand it conceptually. Yeah.
So is the candidate penalized for that?
That's a great question. Absolutely not. The candidate is in no way penalized on edTPA for the performance of their students. It's not scored on the performance of their students. It's all the rubrics are on the candidate. And so what does the candidate know? So let's say the candidate got to that place in this example with our son. The candidate would simply identify, like, this isn't something that this child knew. And what it tells me as the teacher about that is that this child understands conceptually what we're doing, but they don't yet have the academic language to support it. And so then they have an opportunity to talk about, what would I do in the future? Right? Maybe they recognize I could do more upfront discussion. I could use the words compare and contrast. Maybe they were just using, how are things alike and how are they different? And so the candidate is never penalized for the work that their student does. It's really,
it has to show that how they're making this attempt. They have to select certain academic language and then show how they were trying to help.
yeah, they identify in the planning task, what are some words or some constructs that the students might struggle with? So like a math example might be numerator and denominator, right? And identifying, if I'm just learning fractions and which one is which, I don't know. And so they might know numerator and denominator are challenging terms when you're first learning those. And so they're really just identifying in that planning task, words or constructs that they know will be challenging for their students. They're addressing those and supporting those in the instruction task. And then in the assessment task, they're using their students' use of those words to really think about their own effectiveness in teaching and what their students were able to know and do.
Does edTPA have their own lesson plan template?
So we don't require a specific lesson plan template. No, there are, in the handbook, you'll see guidance on what should be included on a lesson plan template. But no specific templates required. Candidates are free to use something that maybe their program requires, maybe something that the school district and where they're completing their teaching requires. So no. We don't.
But when they are going to insert and say, I'm going to use this academic language, where do they show, how do they tell that's the academic language?
There's a prompt, a specific prompt. Yep, it's prompt 4 in task 1, specifically asks them to identify which academic language constructs. Yeah. So the other piece, little smaller language that's right on the inside of academic language, so kind of closer to those center circles, you can see justifying planning decisions, analyzing teaching, and using data to inform instruction. And so those are the additional constructs associated with effective teaching that are measured by edTPA. Certainly recognizing there are other constructs associated with effective teaching that are not part of the assessment. No assessment is a complete and total picture, but these are 3 constructs of effective teaching that are assessed by edTPA. So their ability to justify their planning decisions, again, based on what they know about their students, and also an opportunity, what do they know about best practice based in theory and research? And so that's in there too. Analyzing teaching is the last of the rubrics in the second task, in the instruction task. And that analyzing their teaching effectiveness asks them to really look at those videos, think back and reflect on those lessons, and analyze their own effectiveness in terms of the teaching. And then using data to inform instruction. That's part of using the whole class data, also using data from those 3 focus learners to really say, if I was teaching this again, this is what I would do different. I would make these changes. Like I've learned from this.
Mandy, were you able to get to the actual edTPA materials?
Yes.
Sorry, I hate when that happens.
It was
in the
in
middle.
Oh, it came back. I know you walked away and it, yes, I know, right?
I could do that again all day.
Okay.
Evan and Benjamin, can you guys hear us?
Yeah, we hear you. Camera's gone.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Camera's not there, but we can hear.
Oh,
Oh, because
We can see you.
and it looks like the camera's on, the green light's on.
Oh, no.
Yes, right there. No,
We're the
Oh,
green one.
Oh, goodness.
did we? No, they hear.
Maybe we'll try that strategy again. I'll stand
There
up.
it is. There.
Oh,
Seriously?
something happened. Did you push something?
You pressed
Yeah,
our
the video was just.
Oh,
It
you
wasn't
pushed the
me
video.
standing
Okay. Thank you.
You did it.
Okay.
So again, using data to inform instruction is the candidate's opportunity to really talk about what do I know, not just now about my own teaching, but what do I know about my students' learning from the data from that lesson. And so looking at, again, that data from across their classroom and also their focus learners to really think about what does this tell me about what my students have learned? And if there's anything I would do differently, what would I do differently in the future when teaching these lessons?
And for that, in those 3 to 5 lessons, do they have to they have to show that they use the data in one of those subsequent lessons?
No,
Or just
that's
like talk about how
That's a great question. They just talk about how they would use that data. What does it tell them and what would they do differently in the future? They don't actually have to apply it in those 3 to 5 lessons.
do candidates choose 5 lessons?
Some of them do. Yeah, it varies. I mean, you'd think that everybody picks 3, but no, some of them pick 5. I think it kind of just is what they feel like best represents what they want to cover in those 3 to 5 lessons. Yeah, it varies.
It's whatever lessons they want. They want to do a social emotional lesson, or if they want to do a behavior lesson.
There are content standards, so they do have to be addressing its content specific, so they are addressing content. So it might be literacy, maybe mathematics, whatever it is, whatever field they're in, they are subject specific.
And there's one video of one of the 3 lessons?
Great question. There's each handbook has just a little twist to it, just to keep you on your toes. And so some of the handbooks require just one video. All of them have an option for a second. So if it only requires one, there's an option for a candidate to provide a second video. That way, if they haven't captured what they want in one video clip and maybe the other one came from another day, they have an opportunity to showcase kind of 2 pieces of their teaching. Some handbooks do require 2 video clips because when they were designed, the design committees who designed those handbooks felt very firmly that there were specific things that needed to be seen, and so they required 2 videos.
The handbooks are specific to different credentials.
They're specific to different content areas. And yes, credentials, there's a multiple subject. There's 2 multiple subject handbooks right now. And then there are a number of single subject handbooks, and each of those are discipline specific. So there's a secondary math, a secondary history, social studies, ELA, those kind of things.
How long are the videos and what are they required to show within that time frame?
Yeah, the videos are a total of no more than 15 minutes. So it is a snapshot. This isn't meant to be record your whole lesson and let's, have somebody score the entire thing, but really a small part. The handbooks do give guidance on what should be included in the videos. So there is some guidance. Really, it's easier to talk about what should not be included in the video. What I'm doing right now would be a really terrible edTPA video, right? It's just me talking at people. So that's really not what candidates want to do. It's not an assessment of their content knowledge, of their ability to stand and kind of rattle off facts that are true. It's really how are they engaging their students. So you'll see when you look at the instruction task, rubrics 6, 7, 8, and 9 are the rubrics that are primarily scored. The primary source of evidence is the video. So you'll see those constructs.
Can you give some examples of some things? Sorry.
Learning environment, engaging students in learning, subject-specific pedagogy, those are the kind of things that deepening student learning, those are the 4 rubrics. So they're really showing how they are having a positive learning environment, how they're engaging their students in active learning. So not just standing and lecturing, but how are they engaging their students in active learning? How are they deepening their students' learning? So not just teaching what's here, but helping students who are really ready kind of drive deeper and further into that content. And that's really seen through like questioning and using questioning strategies to help students think about things on a deeper level. And then the use of subject-specific pedagogy is also part of that video. So are they using pedagogical strategies that are appropriate for that content area?
We'll be able to look at what's required. We have that material, right?
Yep.
I asked just because 15 minutes looks very different in whatever classroom that you're in. And if you're trying not to be sage on stage, 5 minutes, 7, 10 minutes can be taken up by students just kind of thinking and trying to process. And am I having to capture all of my 3 focus learners, and how much am I trying to demonstrate within that 15 minutes?
They don't have to capture their focus learners in the videos. If they do, that's great, but they don't have to. They can just position the camera and capture their class. They don't have to capture those 3 focus learners in those videos for task 2. And what most candidates do is record the entire lesson, and then they pick the moments that they want, right? So they might teach for 45 minutes, and they might say, you know what, it's minutes like 12 through 24. That was my A game, right? I was engaging my students in, what we were learning. They were talking. And so most candidates will record a much larger section. In fact, most of them record all their days and then pick from those what they want to highlight as their moments.
Can they chunk their videos from different days to sum up to 15 minutes?
Great
Can they
question.
edit it? Because I remember
For-
I did CalAPA and I was like limited to
Correct. So
that chunk of time without editing.
that's
and
the
then
same for
FaceTime and
all
that
of the
stuff.
models. Yes. So
Okay.
they don't, they cannot what I call like cherry picking to
Yeah.
put together like a super video, right? Like, let me show my best here, my best, like a highlight reel. They cannot do that for task 2. So for task 2, it's minutes of consecutive teaching. So, sometimes candidates are like, what? There's just 3 minutes of my students like quietly working on something. That's okay. Scorers will just sit and watch and that's fine. It doesn't matter. In the assessment task, candidates do have the option to provide evidence of their student work samples as either written files, so PDFs or Word documents, or audio and video files. And in those, they can cherry pick and kind of piece together whatever they want. So if they're showing their students' use of academic language, they might have that across those 3 to 5 days, and they might pick different students, moments of time from different students using the terminology. So they can do that in task 3, just not in task 2.
Question, the typical students or candidates who take this assessment, where are they at in their teaching journey?
It's in their student teaching
Okay, so it's in their
experience.
student teaching, so about a semester, because I know like when we did national boards, like the idea, like the best practice is make sure your students are comfortable with videoing and have them video,
Yes.
a few times, so it's not just like, oh my goodness, there's a camera and we go look around.
That's right.
And so I was just curious to like, for planning purposes for a teacher candidate in their final semester, however, I don't know how the programs work anymore. I know we did an initial student teaching and a final student teaching. And I guess that's a good question too. If they do have that initial and final student teaching for the edTPA, is it throughout the year? Is it at the semester or?
Great question. For edTPA right now, those 3 to 5 lessons need to be with the same group of students. So if they were in the same classroom, and some candidates are, they start in August or September and they're there with those kiddos until June. For those candidates, they are with that same group of students. But the 3 to 5 days has to be the planning, the instruction, and the assessment all have to be the same 3 to 5 days. So they couldn't do planning, say in January, and then not do the teaching and the assessment until a lesson that maybe occurs in April. They need to all be within the same 3 to 5 days. One of the things that my team and I with others are working on is a redevelopment of edTPA that is modular in that it allows for candidates to have kind of what I call like disconnected learning segments, right? So they could then, in that case, do kind of the first module or the first task, maybe in October or November, and then do another one in January, and then maybe another one later in the year. So depending on how many there are, they could then separate those out over a period of time. And that way, whether or not they were with the same group of students, they would have an opportunity to kind of do part of it earlier and then do part of it later, rather than right now, kind of I describe edTPA as a one and done, right? You have to do everything at one time and package it and then submit the whole thing for scoring. The next version of edTPA will be split. It'll be modular.
Okay, and again, it's all for content, because I always think, so like going back to teachers in the real world, like behavior management's huge, right? Like that's your first 3 or 5 years of teaching is just getting down a system that works, and it may work for one year and it may not work the next year. So I don't know if like teachers just have the option to do like different kinds of lessons, just because it is part of teaching, but it won't be specific to like that content, like literacy. And I always think, like I did my initial student teaching K3, and then my final student teaching was 4-6, because ideally your final student teaching is the group age range that you want to work with. And so anyway, so I was just kind of thinking of candidates having that option to do something outside the scope, but still meet the requirements for teaching.
Yeah, right now that's not an option. And with the SB 488, with the literacy bill, even in that, they must be working toward literacy standards. So I suspect that the content-based standards for both CalTPA and edTPA will still need to be maintained for that reason.
Yeah, like I said, just
Great question.
kind of thinking outside the box too, and because that's huge in many of the classrooms right now, behavior management. If you don't have that down, there is no teaching.
I had a question on assessor bias or the possibility of that. It's funny because I'm looking at this and I'm comparing it with the Cal TPA, and it sounds like it's just a combination of both cycles of Cal TPA. But I know with the Cal TPA, they've made it a point to encourage candidates not to mention location or give school specifics and areas like that to avoid bias. But I notice in some of the content, like on task 1, those questions are specifically asked, like describe your school, what's the setting, suburb, town, rural, the facilities and things like that. Whereas Cal TPA doesn't want to know that information. And so do you know, or if there's any bias in that? Like if an assessor looks at it and says, oh, well, this school is in this particular location, I know this population of students, I'm going to assess this a little differently.
Thank you, Devin, for asking that. So candidates are not asked to give the name of their school. They're actually discouraged from giving the name of their school, even the city, even the state, where it is. But just like in Cal TPA, if I'm teaching in a classroom and I have the state of California flag in the background, we know I'm in California or, some other state. So certainly there are always clues within a video that might indicate what state someone is from. But candidates are definitely not asked to provide any identifying information about themselves or their students or their school district or school building. The scorers at the time that they're trained. So they go through training at the beginning when they're first hired, and there is an implicit bias training. There's an entire module on implicit bias that's part of that. And then scorers are also monitored continuously throughout the lifetime of their scoring with Pearson. They are monitored as well against other scorers, but also against benchmarked portfolios.
The challenge I have along those lines, the task itself is going to favor certain candidates' context more than others. So like the bias is sometimes already built in. It reminds me of when I was in college, no one would take the physics class at the university. Everyone would go to the community college and take the physics.
Transferred over.
And in certain contexts and background in different schools, like that 15 minutes to get all those elements is going to be more challenging in certain contexts than others, with a candidate who's not seasoned to be able to handle multiple contexts. And so there's already kind of a bias kind of built in. And so I just trying to figure out like, how do we mitigate that? Because, if I have a class and I have half of the students are newcomers and I'm trying to, right, I want my candidate to be able to handle that, right? But for a new teacher, that 15 minutes, just things can get very stretched out and they're like, I'm supposed to show this in this amount of time. If I go to another school that maybe doesn't have that same type of context, they're like, oh yeah, I can show that in 15 minutes. Because to be as an educator, some classes is easier to do that than others.
But that kind of leads along to my question. So you mentioned an example, if there's a 3-minute clip where the students are kind of just sitting and working, how might that reflect on a rubric for active learning or deepening understanding? And would that be a ding off of what their lesson is? And like the what he's kind of alluding to is every context is different. And so that 3 minutes of the students working could look different.
Yeah, it's very common. I mean, the scorers are all classroom educators. They're all college and university and EPP faculty and staff. So 50% K-12 teachers, 50% EPP faculty and staff. So they're people who are very familiar with independent work time that is given to students. So it's very common for them to see within a video students completing a task, right? Whether that's independently, whether it's small group, they're very used to seeing that. And candidates have that commentary that they can use to provide that context, right? That you can see my students working, as they worked through this activity, they had, 3 minutes of independent work time to do that. So yeah, scorers are very used to seeing that. And if the candidate feels like, gosh, I should explain that, there's certainly room to be able to provide that explanation.
But there's nowhere within the rubric yet, or as of
There's
nowhere
there's
in the
no,
rubric too.
if a video was entirely just students head down, paper to pencil, that would not show any engagement with their students. So yes, they would score lower on that rubric. But there's nothing on any of the rubrics you'll see that says minutes or time on task or anything like that. So there wouldn't be any deduction of points because there was independent work time. That's a part of teaching and learning, right? It's just part of the natural cycle of the gradual release, and that we do have independent work time. And so scorers are, again, have been in the field themselves, and so we're used to that.
Where can I find the rubrics for the video?
Be in the handbook.
Which is the last document. If you scroll down, there's a PDF document. It's like orange, click on that, and then
I'm in the handbook. I was just saying which,
I don't know which handbook you're looking at, so I can't tell you which page, but
they're in there,
yeah, if you scroll through it, if you scroll through, and I'm happy to.
The rubrics are organized by tasks. So if you look at task 1, the rubrics are in that section. Task 2, the related rubrics are in that section.
It's in this
so
thing?
Task 2 is the video.
Yeah.
It's in that
Okay.
document there. And there's a table of contents, and you can kind of see on there which page number the rubrics are. I'll give you a hint. All of the entire handbook is laid out. The pages are laid out vertically if they're information, and the rubrics are horizontally laid out. So
Yeah.
as you're scrolling through, you'll see
We
the
found them in the
rubric
handbook.
pretty easily.
We're in the handbooks.
We're in the handbook.
I'll show you
Can I
this.
ask you a question? So on a personal note, knowing this, where do you think, or what do you think changes need to be made in the edTPA? Or do you think this is by far just kind of it's a great assessment piece? It really reflects, what teachers are capable of doing and the knowledge of beginning teachers or new teachers. What do you think? I'm just kind of unbiased opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you asking me that question. So I have been working with edTPA since its operational launch in 2013. So I've been in one way or another part of this program since then. I was a faculty member supporting my candidates. I've been an edTPA coordinator. I was an assistant dean who was responsible for the assessment and accreditation at the university that I was at. So I, in one way or another, have worked with this assessment for a very long time. And so your question, what improvements do I think are out there? The modularization is important. It's a lot to put together at one time. Candidates, I believe, will benefit from being able to do part of this at one point in time and part of it at another point in time. They will always, of course, retain the option to do it all at once. Some people just do better, like, let me rip the Band-Aid off and do the whole thing and then put this baby to bed, right? So they'll retain that ability to do kind of the whole thing, or to do this in this more modular piece. So that's something that my team and I are actively working on, is the modularization. The other piece with edTPA, there are multiple different documents right now that help guide candidates through the assessment. There's the handbook, which you see. There's something called an academic language handout. That's a couple pages, 2 or 3 pages, but it's yet another document. And then there's a document called Understanding Rubric Level Progressions. So we call it the URLP. What the Understanding Rubric Level Progressions does is it breaks down each rubric by performance level for the candidates. So performance at a level 3 looks like this. Performance below a level 3 looks like that. And performance above a level 3 might look like this. It describes what performance at each of the 5 levels looks like. That's yet another document that candidates have to work through. So recognizing that, my team and I have spent the past year working to combine those 3 documents into one. And we're excited that this June, EPPs will have access to the new and improved longer, but single document to support candidates. And candidates, when they begin registering in August, will also have that new handbook version. So it's a lot to juggle. If I was a candidate and had this document and this document and this document, and I didn't know how to use them all, that's confusing. And so we've spent a lot of time really purposely thinking about how can we combine these and take the onus of which document do I look at when off of a candidate. So that's coming this summer. And then I think there's also an opportunity to look at how many, just quite frankly, how many words are used, right? And being able to take some of the redundancy out. The redundancy was built in to ensure that if candidates missed something in one place, they got it in 2 or 3 or 4 other places. But that also adds just to the length of the materials. And so really being thoughtful when we do this kind of redesign and redevelopment about how do we provide very clear, very explicit directions so that the redundancy multiple times isn't necessary. And then the last thing I would call out is the use of the terminology with academic language. The shift has really focused away from things like syntax and discourse, which were what we were talking about 10 or 12 or 14, 15 years ago. And now it's really about reading and literacy within the discipline. And so that's another shift that'll be made as well. So those are kind of the big things that I see as opportunities.
I
Thank you.
love that concept of the modular aspect. I think that provides more flexibility than they
So
currently
much.
have. Yeah, I like that.
So
And how
much
is the calibration process, like how many hours does a new assessor need to spend in the calibration process?
The modules right now are about 22 hours of training. So they work through modules that kind of just go over the basics of edTPA, the structure, the architecture, the design. They have the implicit bias training that I talked about. And then they work through all of the modules. And then at the end, they score 2 live portfolios. So they're actually scoring portfolios that are benchmark portfolios. And then they have a live meeting with a scorer, a trainer, and other scorers who are also going through training, and they use that also as calibration. So that's kind of the whole process of the training is that. And then, like I said, they're monitored continuously in the background with benchmark portfolios that they are scoring as well.
Thank you.
Do we know the type of schools the scores are coming from? Like, is there a breakdown between folks who have Title I school experience versus non? And also for the pass rates, it's a separate question. Do we have data on, are the pass rates lower for candidates who are at Title I schools where they're doing their student teaching versus not?
Yeah, so the scorer breakdown, I don't have that level of detail. We know that 50% of the scorers come from higher ed or EPPs. It might be alternative route programs as well. So, and then the other 50% from K-12 classrooms. So I know that. In terms of pass rates for candidates in different demographics, like different areas, we do have that. It's in an annual administrative report, which is publicly available on edTPA.com. So it's out there, you can see it, and you can see the pass rates for candidates who might be in different areas. It's actually not broken down by Title I per se, but by percentage of free and reduced lunch, percentage of ESL, percentage of students with special needs. So it's broken down by those categories.
Can I find that?
It's on edTPA.com. And if you go to, when you're there, click programs. And from programs, I think it's going to be on the right-hand side, you'll see edTPA administrative report. And if you have any trouble finding that, let me know and I can help you navigate there. But edTPA.com, click programs, right-hand side, and there'll be administrative reports over on the right-hand side.
In your experience, is there one content area that candidates seem to have the most trouble passing, or is there like, okay, what are?
Yes, there's two, physical education and secondary mathematics are the two areas that Jason just gasped, by the way, for everybody who's not here, he just gasped. He's like, what?
Why is that? What are folks messing up on?
Yeah, physical education, when the professional organization, when SHAPE was engaged in the development of that handbook, they felt very strongly that candidates needed to be able to support the entire class the entire time that they were working, even if they're just working with a few students. So in all the other fields, candidates can say, you know what, I'm going to work with my small red reading group, my red bird reading group, right? And that group of 4 to 6 students might be their entire class for their edTPA. So they might take a smaller group of students and say, it's easier for me to manage kind of all of this with a smaller group of kiddos. When the physical education handbook was designed, the SHAPE folks felt very serious that it's the need, the safety concerns of being able to monitor an entire class while also working with a small group of students was essential. And so that's part of it. And candidates, they struggle with that. That's a tall order. And so, especially if that's the first time that they've really had responsibility for a full class and not just for a small group of students. So that's something that with the field we will look at as we, work through kind of the redevelopment of the assessment. Secondary mathematics is requires that candidates are really looking at several different components. So procedural fluency, mathematical reasoning, like all of these kind of things, precision. And so it's, there's another layer, I think, of complexity that, again, as the assessment is being redeveloped, will be looked at with experts from that field as well.
And in general, what trips up candidates? Their particular task that?
So some of the things that candidates are challenged by, one of the more common ones is if in edTPA, their evidence of student learning, their student work samples need to actually be evidence of student learning, not just my student did this. So not just them describing what their student did, but actually having evidence. And so it's either that audio or video clip or, a picture or a PDF or a Word document of something their students did. One of the things that challenges them is that if they're writing about a particular assignment their students were working on or an assessment that their students were working on, and part of it was writing. So let's say it was a first grade class and we're working on sequencing. And so they're putting pictures from the story in order, right? But then they have to sit and tell the teacher, this was first, then this, and last this. If they only show the physical picture of what the student sequenced, but they're talking about how the student also had to talk with them about this, they need to include the video clip or an audio clip as well. And so sometimes they miss that. They think, I just need to show the picture. I just can take a picture of what my student did, and they don't think to include that audio or video clip as well.
I have 2 quick questions, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Do the focus students need to be in the video clip for edTPA?
No, they don't.
There's a prompt that says, provide the name of the clip and clearly describe how the scorer can identify the focus students whose work is being portrayed with their physical description or position in the classroom based off the video.
It's only
Can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, it's only if the student captured their focus learner during the video clip. Some of them want to, because then they can show that, especially if it's an oral activity that they're doing, they can show evidence of their students learning. through that video clip. So, but they don't have to include them as part of that task 2 video clip.
Okay, so they could just put like NA and it doesn't get condition coded out or anything, right?
Their focus learners not there. There's one handbook, the physical education handbook. They do need to include their focus learner in the video. And so there's a component there of that.
Okay. And then my second question. So this honestly feels like a very simplified version of the CalTPA. And I recognize CalTPA is based off of California standards, and I imagine that's because we require extra things in California of our teachers. When we developed the standards, I'm sure it was looking at the other standards, just kind of knowing what I know in education and adding layers to it. Why, like looking at this, I'm still kind of confused. Why are we using 2 assessments from the same assessment group if they're really measuring? I mean, Devin said this earlier, like almost identical things. This seems like a little less work, but like, do you have any idea as to why we have 2 separate assessments?
So
Well, the law allows.
it's the law that
I mean,
allows.
The law allows for thousands, right?
I understand that, but both are by Pearson. So like from my vantage point, why is the same company creating 2
I
different
see.
assessments for the same task?
Okay.
That's what my question is.
Yeah, that's okay, Benjamin. I understand what you're saying. So actually, the CalTPA is the commission's assessment. It was it was developed by California educators who were part of a work group that was called by the commission. Pearson's the operational vendor for that. edTPA had been years ago, 10, 15 years ago, developed by the folks at Stanford. And rather than just using it locally, they wanted to make it available nationally. And so they then contracted with evaluation systems as well to make it available nationally to really what Pearson is doing in both of the assessments is providing the registration piece, providing the platform to collect all the evidence, pushing evidence out to scorers, collecting the scores, and then getting scores back to the commission, the programs, and the candidates.
It's a little ironic that California University created a national test that is opposite of a California. It's just that's all ironic. How interesting would it be if we were able to compare oranges and oranges? I'm not saying I want to go down to one assessment. But it's just so interesting to me because this is very similar to what I am used to from the CalTPA. And I think Devin's having the similar experience. I've gone through each of the documents.
But I think in California, we like to create our own things, right?
No,
So,
I know.
For example, with
That's what.
CalTPA, we're like, we wanted it to match the California context and all of that.
Right. That's 100%, I think, my takeaway. I mean, we always do things a little different. And so why not have our own test that might just be like an extra step on top of the edTPA, right? Like that's kind of my takeaway right now.
I feel exactly. I know exactly how you feel, Benjamin, and I'm yes, you're right. I think I was thinking the same thing even when we started this work group. Not really having much familiarity with edTPA. I know CalTPA like the back of my hand, but after looking through some of the documents, I'm thinking it's just kind of a spin-off of the exact same thing. So, but. That's neither here nor there, but yeah.
Well, and I'm actually glad that you recognize that, right? Because it's addressing the same assessment design standards and the same TPEs, right? It's following the same assessment design standards that's required by the commission. And so both assessments were designed under those assessment design standards and are required to meet the same TPEs. So I would hope that you would see more similarities than differences. If you saw more differences than similarities, that might be more problematic.
Can I ask you, so for each task,
Yes.
they have their artifacts,
Correct.
and then they are scored on each of those 5 rubrics?
That's correct. So I have on the screen the 3 tasks. You see that in the left-hand column. The artifacts that they submit as part of that task are in the center column. And then the 5 rubrics per task are on the far right column. And so those artifacts you can see for planning, lesson plans, instructional materials, student uncompleted or blank student assignments and assessments. and a planning commentary. The combination of those artifacts provide the evidence for rubrics 1 through 5. But you'll see when you look at the rubrics in a bit, there's no rubric that's evaluating their lesson plans. They're not evaluated specifically on like, did you write a good lesson plan or not? It's about what inclusive of the lesson plan and the instructional materials and your commentary, all of those things taken together, what is that telling about planning for content understandings or supporting student learning needs. So if a candidate misses something about supporting student learning needs on their lesson plan, they have other opportunities where that evidence is going to be provided.
Okay, that was my.
Yeah.
And it's multiple subject only that has the fourth.
It is, yes.
Okay.
So the multiple subject has
It
a
has
fourth
four
task.
tasks, not 3.
I didn't put that on here because it muddies the water for all the other fields. And so it's really just easier to talk about these 15. But multiple subject, the requirement in the state is that they are evaluated on both literacy or ELA and math. And so there's the first 3 tasks are either literacy or mathematics. And then the fourth task is the opposite content area. It's a much smaller task. It's only 3 rubrics. It's about re-engaging students in a lesson where there have been some content misunderstandings.
Does that require a video? It doesn't, right?
It does not require
Okay.
a video for that one. No, it does not. They have the opportunity
Of
to
course.
provide one, but they don't have to,
Okay.
no. And so that fourth task, it's really a combination of a little bit of planning, a little bit of instruction, and a little bit of assessment in that other discipline, because really no one needs to do 6 tasks for a TPA. So they do 3 in the primary content area and then 2 in the other one. Right now, programs and their candidates have the option which to choose, either primarily math or primarily ELA.
Won't be the case.
That will not be the case beginning this fall because it has to be literacy.
Yeah.
So it'll be 3 tasks of literacy and then the final task will be math.
So help me understand this. So in each one of these rubrics, 15 or 18, that's what goes into the score.
Correct,
And each element has the potential of 5.
correct.
Are they weighted equally?
They
And
are
is
weighted
the
equally.
score, the potential score is 15?
That's
Or the
correct.
potential score is 45?
So that's a great question. So each rubric is worth 5 points.
Okay,
So in a task, you could have 5s on all 5 rubrics. You could have a 25, right? So on a 3-task handbook, like what you see here, the total possible score would be 75.
Okay.
The current passing standard in California, not the secondary passing standard, but the primary passing standard, is a 41 out of 75. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of like, you're not getting all 3s, right? You have some rooms that maybe you're getting some 4s or 5s, but maybe you're also getting some 2s, right? You're getting sort of a range there.
and it's that same percentage applied to the multiple subject?
It is, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And
The
there's
multiple
a,
subject is 90. It's out of 90 points. It's an extra, it's only 3 rubrics.
right,
So it's an extra 15
And what's a
points.
passing score?
49. Yeah, 49.
I have a question on feedback and support.
Yeah.
You know, and we've gone back and forth with this on the Cal TPA, where just when I think I understood what they mean by acceptable and unacceptable support, again, it's like, no, that's not it. And so do you have clear guidelines on whether or not you can provide feedback and the details of that feedback that can be provided when you're preparing candidates?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So, and I'm gonna see if I can do this relatively without a whole lot of craziness. Let's see if I can pull this up for you. Thinking. Okay, so edTPA.com. We have a couple different things on here that well, one thing on here I'll show you, and then one thing on another site that I'll show you. So programs have kind of a page over here, and here is that administrative report that I was referencing earlier. It's right there. Programs have the option to set up for their program what we call a faculty feedback tool, which is that candidates can load their documents, their videos, they can load all their evidence, all their artifacts into the system. And then instead of turning it in for scoring, they can share it with their faculty.
I love that.
And then their faculty can go in and can annotate the videos, they can give them feedback, they can say, you uploaded a blank document, right? Which that's a condition code. I mean, a scorer can't score something if there's nothing there. And so the faculty could say, you've uploaded a blank document. You need to go back and double check this, right? Or, you know, let's look at this video clip because you're doing all the talking. You're like standing at the front of the room and just talking at your students for 15 minutes. And let's talk about how are you engaging your students. So that's one thing that that folks can do. And you can kind of see that there's some program resources here for that. For candidates, I'm going to talk about.
Do you have data on how that feature is being used?
I don't
Or
know.
does it collect data or can it collect?
I don't, that's a great question. And I'm happy to take that back and look into that. If the TPA work group would like us to, we can certainly go back and look and see maybe how many California programs are making use of this. And,
I would say.
Is there an additional fee?
there's no fee.
Okay.
No, there's no fee for that for either candidates or their programs.
That
Um,
seems like that would alleviate all of these technical issues, right?
Correct,
with
right.
edTPA,
And I'm
Yeah,
thinking
where
if it's
people are uploading stuff.
only second semester, then first semester we do the faculty feedback tool, and then second semester
Yeah.
when it's time to submit.
And there are programs across the country that do it exactly that
Right.
way, right? They kind of do what they might call a mini or a pre-edTPA, a mock edTPA, where they'll say, during the first semester, you're going to do, and they might just use their data and say, we're not going to do the whole thing, right? But we're just going to, we know our program struggles with rubrics. I'm making something up 2, 5, and 9, right? And so they're just going to have their candidates do the pieces that kind of correlate to those rubrics. They put them in there, they give their candidates feedback. And then when their candidates are ready, they've got that feedback to actually use.
And what are the parameters around the feedback?
That's, yes. So let me pull up.
That was uploaded in there.
I'm going to pull up. This is on edtpa.org. We have 2
Okay.
websites just to make life
Oh,
super
OregonCom.
exciting.
That's
OregonCom, let me just tell you, in a previous world, that seemed like a great idea. That doesn't anymore. No.
Does it link to each other?
No, and we really don't want them to because .com is for candidates, .org is for organizations,
Got it.
but man alive, it's just, yeah.
Remembering which
it's-
one thing.
Well, and trying to keep people like in the right space, right? That can be challenging. But this is the site where all EPPs have access to everything. We have a resource library. I'm just going to show you quickly. We have 76 different resources in here. Everything from all of our handbooks. If I were to type in the word recording, if I can spell it, you'll see we have 20 different recordings that we've had, webinars and workshops that we've recorded over the years. We have that. The other thing I wanted to show you though about the support is right down here. So resources for stakeholders. We have one that is called Teachers Who Support Teacher Candidates. Honestly, I think this is probably my favorite resource. Look, it's exactly where I was going to go because I show it all the time. So this is actually like I can show you another document that's, I will tell you, I think very text heavy. It's great information, but it's incredibly text heavy about
That's
what
the
can
one
and
that's
cannot you
uploaded
do.
to our folder.
Yeah, it's
not
hot
this
mess.
one.
This one, I've given this one to the folks. So this one is much better. Let me just show you the front of it, right? It's just Teachers Who Support Teacher Candidates. It gives a little like who, what, when, where about edTPA. You now know this little graphic. I told you we use it all the time. But it has this acceptable supports. And so let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for us. And so it talks about acceptable score, supports, discussing tasks and rubrics, discussing samples. We don't maintain a database of portfolios to share with programs because of confidentiality, right? We would have to have permission from all those K-12 parents to do that. So we don't do this, but we encourage programs and we work with programs to learn how to do what I call build your bank, right? And build a bank that they can do that. And so you can see that's fine. Discussing support documents about lessons or examples, using rubrics or constructs, rubric language in courses or observations, clinical supervision, asking questions, looking at video recordings, all of those kind of things, arranging technical assistance. The unacceptable supports, there's only 4. And I honestly, when I look at these, I'm like, who would educator would do this, right? Like it's common sense, like don't edit your candidates for, I don't know any educators who'd be like, let me have your TPA prompt. I'm going to write that for you, right? Like, don't offer critiques of responses that are, so not giving alternative or correct response, but giving more, kind of asking those questions and helping candidates think about parts that they need to think more about, but not telling them what to write. Not instructing candidates on which video clips to select for submission, but helping them understand how to use the rubrics to identify their own moments of what they think best demonstrates their best moments of teaching. And then not uploading candidate responses to public areas. And so not taking your, I mean, again, I don't know any EPP that's going to be like, let me just take this and I don't know, maybe they want to showcase it. They're very proud of it. So, but that's.
Are there any sentence frames to help the candidates kind of guide their feedback?
Yeah, the sentence frames are all on the commentary prompts that you'll see that they are full sentences, and then the candidate kind of has brackets and they just put their cursor right inside the bracket and start typing.
I was thinking more for feedback.
Oh, for feedback. No, we don't have anything that's like sentence frames for feedback. We don't have that right now.
I'm thinking about the authentic piece component. So I was looking at the math assessment and then I'm thinking about that 15-minute video and just trying to figure out why the 15 minutes in terms of what you have to show as a mathematics teacher. Like if you want to do that well, at least it'll take the whole period to show the conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, mathematical reasoning, or problem-solving skills. It's a flow that if you're going to work with how the mind learns, you don't rush through that
That's
process. Right. And maybe not like over a course of a few days, but I can show something within that.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at the rubric, and because it didn't show in that 15 minutes, it doesn't mean that the candidate didn't do that in the lesson or has the ability to do it. But the test is saying, no, you didn't show that, and the assumption is you can't do that. But maybe they did, but not within that 15-minute window. So why the 15 minutes?
Yeah, this was developed a long time ago. So why 15 minutes? I'm not sure why 15, why it was, and it's usually up to 20. Some fields it might be 15, but it's usually up to 20 minutes. What a lot of candidates do in that situation is they'll take the opportunity to submit 2 video clips. So maybe one of them is from one part of the lesson where they're doing a couple of those things. And then the other clip is either from later in that same day or maybe even the next day where they're doing kind of addressing the other pieces of that. So they'll take the opportunity to say, yeah, this took me 45 minutes to get through all of this, but they only need to show, a few moments of it. They don't need to show kind of the entire long process of how did I get from here all the way to there. The other important thing to know is that for rubric 6, 7, 8, 9, the video is the primary source of evidence. It's not the only source of evidence. So if a candidate says, I did these things, what you don't see in the video is that I did this afterward, right? That this was kind of the next thing. They can explain that in their commentary, and their commentary is also part of their evidence. And so scorers are trained. Part of that big, 20, 22 hours of training is about how to find evidence and where it lives in an edTPA, and that it might not be in the primary source of evidence. It might be in a secondary source of evidence. And so if a candidate is writing about what they did and they say, in my video, you see the first 20 minutes of a lesson, we did these things and here's what we did later. That's the scorer will use that to speak.
Just as a candidate, my instinct was like, I have to do this within this 15 minutes. I've been doing this all year and I couldn't get the kids to finish their warm up minutes. And so the next instinct would be, how do I superficially do this in
Right.
15 minutes? Not how I would normally do it, but
Right.
for this, I'm gonna try to squeeze this all in 15 minutes.
Mhm.
And so then it interferes with it being authentic, just because the natural way I read that as a candidate is, and interviewing other teachers who've recently gone through it, it's like I have to do this within that 15 minutes.
In addition to your coursework and your clinical practice, and you're thinking about the students that you are gonna teach the next morning, this is the way that you've just described it to me seems like a whole college level course just to take this, and that's where the time consuming redundancy and what everyone is saying, a waste of time, not that it is, it's just that it's a lot of work, and I'm trying to figure out, as you were talking, I'm trying to figure out implementation of something of this high caliber, and how do we adjust and how do we make it relevant while still including all of these wonderful things that you thought about that show best practice for our teachers. It's an overwhelming thought.
And again, this is challenging for seasoned
Correct.
educators.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about where they're at, and some are just probably just worried about, like, how do I put class under control with the classroom management, and just the fear of, like, who's going to, like, flip out during this video. They're already nervous, probably not thinking straight.
Well, I think ideally, like, it's embedded, right? Like, I always like, that's like the ideal is like, you've gone through your coursework, you guys talked about this, maybe you did some mock, I don't know, training, or you like, oh, you're the student, I'm the teacher, I'm gonna be the bad student, how would you do, ideally they have that kind of, but I don't know what the reality is in the programs. Just like if is faculty using that one feature? So I guess my question to that is, do you, like, if you don't see them using it or they ask you, do you do like in-person training? Do you say, oh, go to the website? Cause
Well, I'm gonna pause you for just a moment
Yes.
because I just want to clarify.
Yes.
We got a slide that we gotta complete.
I've got it open.
I know.
I have
I
it
was just
open.
gonna say, I'm happy to answer questions
But if you
all
could
day, but
finish responding to her.
absolutely. So what my team and I do, we hold 4 times a year. We hold coordinator meetings, much like Cal TPA does. We hold coordinator meetings. We do that specifically just for educators in California. We do sort of, we use them to share kind of updates, anything that we need to talk about. We use them as office hours for programs. They come with their questions. But then we also feature things like the faculty feedback tool. We try to do that early in the academic year so that folks can decide to use it if they're going to. And then we also use the spring to do a demonstration of results analyzer to help programs understand not just how and where to access their data, but also the various kind of reports that they can get and how they can use those reports as well. Yeah, and then I usually present it like Meredith Fellows and things like that. So
like us, like you said, like, it's just so overwhelming, like I'm sure it is for the faculty too.
Well, and I would imagine, right? Overwhelming is a good word, but I'm thinking if the funding is not sufficient, then it's just an additional task that they have to do on top of everything else they have to do, right? Or if there are extra faculty hired to be able to share the workload, right? But the funding may not be there
Well,
to
too,
support.
depending on volunteers, like it sounds like, I think Klaus was talking about, they just have a group of people who just.
Well, I think.
Which isn't how it was originally designed,
Correct.
right? It's originally designed to be the people who are doing it, grading it, giving feedback, but that just has evolved into no longer. Well, and that was true for edTPA too, because Stanford did all of their grading originally. And then eventually they contracted out because it grew too big and too unmanageable, right? So.
Can I go back to the faculty feedback tool? That is specific to faculty and programs. Is there anything similar to that for students, or am I misunderstanding that? And candidates can upload their practice, or is
So
there
in
anything
that,
that they?
it is our e-portfolio system, which is our system where candidates are uploading their artifacts. So they're uploading, candidates are going into their account. They're uploading whatever they want their faculty or their supervisor, whoever it is, to review. And then the faculty member or the supervisor can go in and access those and then give that feedback on any of the materials that are in there.
And is it only the faculty from their programs, or is it just anybody?
It's the faculty from their program. And when the program, if you said, we want to use faculty feedback tool, I would say, I just need the email addresses of all the faculty who will be involved, right? Because it might not be everybody. It might be it's just people who are working with student teachers, or it might be, yeah.
Well, I'm also thinking about the candidates who feel like they don't get sufficient feedback. If there's an opportunity for them to go away from their programs and go directly to edTPA to get feedback and support without having to go to their programs, because some of my residents are like, well, my program keeps saying read the handbook because they can't do anything else, and that which is not true, but the way that the program interprets what they're allowed to do is not sufficient. So can the student go directly to edTPA to use some sort of feedback tool like that?
Right
Or
now,
it's not
there's
available?
not an option. There's no one that at our program that would do that. Yeah.
Is that something that you think might be possible? I mean, that's a great
Yeah.
recommendation, because again, if the candidate is not feeling supported and they're paying for this,
Paying
right?
for the edTPA, yeah.
I mean, I'm a big believer in the art of what possible, right? And so what is possible, I'm not one to say that I think most things are impossible. So do I think that's a possibility? I mean, I think that there's a possibility that candidates there could be something in place.
Right, better. So I gotta take a quick break.
Mandy's got the slide up.
I've got the slides up. No, we were supposed to spend very little time doing this part. And we were all supposed to actually try to take it and do
Oh,
it.
that's right.
That's what we're supposed to be
And
doing.
score it.
is-
And
And then score it.
Let's get to it.
I don't think we'll have time.
But we're down to 25 minutes. So maybe let's take a couple of minutes though, just with the frame of mind of how would I respond to this?
Yeah.
And do I feel prepared, and and then maybe just pick either task 1, task 2, task 3, or task 4 if you're multiple subjects. And then look at the rubric that goes with it. Maybe let's take 5 minutes to do that. Does that sound good, Ursula?
Yep, that sounds great.
It won't be anywhere close to that. But then we have to put this slide together
Okay.
in 20 minutes.
I'm just gonna step out of your way so that you all can work, but I'll be here if you have more questions, I will
There
be here.
is a correlation, the higher, free, reduce and EL population, the mean goes down.
It does, yes.
But if you have a high percentage of SPED eligibility from 76 to 100%, that's the highest mean. There's only about 7% of candidates that criteria. I'm trying to think of a school population that is probably specializing in.
I was gonna say, it's a school that only does that.
Yeah, seems like they're supported. Overall, the means are going from like 41 to 43
41 to 43.
is the range between all the different demographics.
Okay.
Where do I find? Where to go now?
On this,
Email.
Juliet's email.
yep, if you look at the bottom, it says link to resources here. You can open the folder. Ben and Devin, do you understand what we're doing?
Yes, I was just kind of looking through I just picked physical education because I taught physical education, but I'm just trying to get around the expectations. For example, I know that there's several task 1. So there's a task 1 planning commentary. There's a task 1 context for learning information. So I'm just trying to really navigate mentally what the actual expectations are for the edTPA.
I read the context as part A from the Cal TPA, and then the planning is more like part BC.
Okay, thank you.
You have multiple subjects. Should I do task 4?
I was doing task 3, so you've done
Okay,
that
great.
before. Not too much time
No.
on our first part. It's fine. It's totally
Well,
fine.
everybody, like, presentations just wrapped up. It's,
That's where we're at. And so we're taking 5 minutes to pretend like we're
Okay.
trying it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then,
I'm changing timing to say, I still want to have each model have the opportunity to share out, even for 5 minutes.
okay,
But I'm saying let's
In
start
reality.
that share out 4:30.
okay,
Extra time, but.
okay, great.
5 minutes. goes.
It sure does.
Yeah.
We'll take it.
maybe, I missed what Juliet said. So
We'll go back at 4:30.
she have a little bit longer.
5 minutes.
5 minutes extra.
That's our 5 minutes to do the thing.
There you go.
5 minutes to do the thing.
5 minutes for me to read this same sentence.
I've read the same one a few
Page
times.
so that I stopped reading the same sentence.
All right. Let's jump in together. So we have 3 tasks. The first one is just any highlights of the edTPA model. So what do we notice?
I
That-
loved what they did with their results. You know, how they have that portal where the faculty can go in and preview that item. I'd like to make a note for that. And I also like the concept of the modular as opposed to summative.
It's a new one, she said, right?
edTPA is working on a modular approach. And should have that available in the next year.
She said July 1st, no? Or is that-
She
said over the summer?
Fall of 2026.
Okay.
And then what do you call that where that portal where faculty can go in and preview?
Faculty feedback tool.
Faculty feedback tool.
Yes.
I feel like that would mitigate a lot of the issues with condition codes.
And I would like to ask for it to be student facing as well, not just specific to faculty.
Hold on, can you say that? Hold on.
Just what I was asking earlier about students being and candidates being able to access the feedback tool as well. Just
Sorry, Vanessa, could you repeat what you said? I missed it.
what I said, just that I would like for them to consider for students to be able to upload their documents to the faculty feedback tool. So not specific to faculty, but students could be able to utilize it as well.
Agreed, yeah.
Do you know if TPA special education has a area for visual impairment and blindness or deaf and hard of hearing, or is it just all special education?
So we, our special education only addresses mild, moderate and extensive support. Yes, so if it's BVI, DHH or early childhood special ed, they have to use the Cal TPA.
The Cal
The Cal TPA has those 3 areas. And TPA right now only has a handbook that addresses mild, mod and extensive. Yes,
I
thank
wanted
you
to
for
ask.
asking that.
Wouldn't that include in the slides?
What? Right now, we're on highlights of the edTPA model.
And
Then the next one's gonna be our wonderings. And then the last one is to what extent does the edTPA address valid and authentic to the work of teaching, reasonable to implement in a wide range of classroom settings, and appropriate for beginning teachers or candidates at the end of their preparation program.
but we're not giving recommendations.
This is not that's not what this was.
Okay.
No, but we could put recommendations and wonderings, right? What if, I think we could phrase it that way.
Student one could go into the wondering.
I like that.
Yeah.
I noticed that I think one of the limitations, right, is that the current model of the edTPA requires it to be the exact same group of students that are in the video that then you provide feedback. And I know we're moving towards a more modular, but I would say a limitation of it right now is if you do not meet the 41 points, you're gonna have to start with a whole new
Isn't
group
it
of
49?
students.
Is it 41?
It's 49 for multiple subject, 41 for everything else. Right?
Mandy, can I ask you to repeat what you just said?
So if you don't achieve the 41 points,
Correct.
but all of the different tasks have to be related to the same group of students,
I'm glad so did you say you'd have to redo the whole thing?
right?
You don't. I'm so thankful you asked. I'm so thankful I was here to hear that. They can redo just one task. And that we
With
call it
a
a
new group of
resubmission. It could be
students.
a whole new group of students. It could be new content. So let's say they were teaching division the first time and now they're on to probability. They could be teaching a whole new group of students and be even teaching probability. And maybe they only did poorly. They got the lowest points on one task. And they're like, that's the task I need to redo. Like, I just didn't get it. I get it now. They just redo that one task. They don't have to redo the whole thing.
And
They-
it can bring their
essentially they-
collective score
Yeah,
up
they
by
like
enough.
bank their scores from, let's say, make it simple. They bank their scores from task 1 and task 2. Then they go back, they just redo task 3. And now those new task 3 scores just get added to the banked task 1 and task 2 scores.
Okay, But that could take, I mean, how long, what is that timeline though? Is that 6 months?
I mean, I honestly see candidates who do a retake within days because they've done it and they've gotten the feedback. They look at it and they're like, I know what I did. I
But
know
how long does it take them to, once they, I mean, that's up to the candidate, how long it takes them to do it, but
Yeah.
once they turn it back in, don't they have to wait for the next window?
So they just have to wait until the next score release.
Right.
And how
So-
often are those?
They vary throughout the year because we cluster them
Yeah.
at peak submission times, right?
Yeah.
Like when we know from 10 years of data, when we put more windows in when we know candidates need them. Yeah.
Okay. But it could potentially mean that someone at the end of the spring term then have to wait till the fall term.
The summer term, we have a summer scoring, so we have one
Okay.
over the summer. So they would potentially have to wait, several, maybe 6, I'd have to look, 4 or 5
But
weeks.
it could stop them from employment,
It could pause them until they get their score back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
because they wouldn't be eligible for employment.
Correct. They wouldn't be
until-
eligible for their credential. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The data that I looked at, does that include candidates who passed and those who did not pass, or just those who passed?
It's the means are from everyone. Yeah, the means are from everyone. So it includes candidates who both passed and failed. And that's also a national, not just specific to California. That admin report is across the nation, not specific to California.
I like the fact that you can also redo individual tasks, which is not something on the Cal TPA. I feel like that's something that
Yeah,
should be added on there.
as a highlight, yeah.
I like the simplicity of the 4 documents. Task 1 is 2 documents, but just the amount of documents in the task, it seemed pretty simplistic.
Streamlined.
Mhm.
Um,
I have all types of issues with the questions
Yeah.
and the content, but
Well, say more about that.
oh no, I pretty much was just going through every single question and saying how I would change it.
Well, so tell me more about that, like what
Oh, I have to
theme
thumb that
do
up.
you see in
Um,
your,
Themes. Some of the language I felt was lazy, like you weren't even trying to be clear. So
so lack of clarity?
lack of clarity. You can throw the laziness in there if you want.
I'm not gonna do.
If there's a restriction and, the page sizes, like just be more explicit with that, or if you can restrict the framing, definitely flexibility for different contexts. Again, going back to that 15-minute, if you restrict it like that, it's not going to be authentic for all candidates. And too much. Yeah, it's some of these things, they're asking a lot of teacher candidates right at the start of their career. And so instead of saying, show all these things, maybe you could be like, okay, show evidence of, talk about 1 or 2, and then maybe a third one that wasn't present, why not? Like that's more reflective and authentic to what I would experience as an educator at that time. It's hard to say because they're specific to the task and the question being asked.
Devin or Benjamin, do you want me to add anything else to highlights? Ursula, you haven't.
No, I'm good. I chimed in. I had those 2,
No, I was going to mention the same 2 Ursula mentioned, as well as Benjamin, the fact that she can just focus on one task. So
Okay,
I thought of another
I wonder why the rubrics aren't embedded within the task so they can see it while they're submitting, and then why there's not a commentary for each of the questions to help clarify.
hold on just a second. I'm actually gonna lift that and put it in our wonderings. Why are the rubrics not embedded in the task? And what was the next one you said?
Why each some questions have the commentary and then in the yellow to offer more clarity or even considerations for the candidate that might be helpful.
Okay.
Why is that not there for each of the questions?
I was gonna say a highlight is the two websites, the .com and .org. And many resources available. My wondering is how do we communicate the amount of resources available? And I want to go back to what Patricia said earlier about collecting the data for how many programs are actually using faculty feedback and the other resources that edTPA makes available.
Okay, so how do we share out the available data? No, not data, the available resources. Okay,
Or how does edTPA share out?
yeah, it's not us.
And then. I forgot what I was saying.
It was
how do
just
we
about the
use-
tool, making really, I think it was, is there a way to look at the data surrounding who's using the tool and who's not? So I think that's what we're looking at. And if they're not using it, then how can we, what's sort of looking for when you go out and promote the tool, so people know it's there.
But she also said that they do 4 times a year convening, so I would say that's another highlight.
Yeah. Do you guys do one-on-one too? Like if I say like, hey, I need some help,
Absolutely.
schedule an appointment, yeah.
Absolutely. We do it all the time.
Office hours as well.
Flexible schedules, office hours.
We have a dedicated email inbox that's monitored by a human being, right? Monitored by a person.
Not
And no
AI.
chat bot.
10 minutes, 10 minutes.
Jason, can I ask just a point of clarity? You said that it would help if the rubrics were embedded where?
In the task themselves,
So while
Here's the.
right up at the top of the task.
while I'm typing, for me to know like, okay, this is what I'm aiming to do.
Oh, I see.
Have it right there.
On the actual prompt where candidates are typing their, I see.
Most folks are not going to try to find that rubric form and be able to look at it side by side.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe we should, just as a human.
That's how I did when I did the CalAPA, but it was also because I felt like I didn't have any resources and I had to do that because I didn't think anybody was gonna, well, I was told no one would give me feedback. So, but I also was a grad student at that time, not an undergrad, so trying to manage all these things.
Okay, so, all right. I'm just gonna throw the prompt and then give me feedback, okay? The first one, to what extent do you think that edTPA is valid and authentic to the work of teaching? I was trying to capture what you were saying earlier, that only one video is required. How can it be authentic to meet all of the tasks and rubric expectations within that period?
15 to 20 rubric expectations.
Right. What else related to valid and authentic?
So accountability wise, like I understand what these forms are for accountability's sake, but I would not have taught longer than a year if I had to fill out these lesson plan templates for every single lesson plan for that entire year. You know what I mean? So like looking at some of the templates and things, those are kind of in addition. There might be things that we think about, right? And they might be things that we plan for, but like, not even the lesson plan templates, just the templates. While they cover a lot of the things that you consider as a teacher, completing all of them is not necessarily authentically how you as a teacher would do day-to-day planning.
Yeah, so the documentation required is unrealistic to actually teaching.
So that's what I was saying. If you're requiring, talk about one or two of these things, because in practice, yes, I can be reflective as an educator, but I can't go into this much detail every single time. And if I'm talking about my continuum of growth, maybe I'm focusing on one or two of these criteria, in the prompt versus like all 4 things I'm supposed to show.
Think of now narrowing, like you do your dissertation or master's work, you have to narrow down the topic and then focus on that one topic. And again, I know they're, again, literacy, right? Because I know the Rika's gone now, right? So. Like the cannons.
Not gone yet. Not gone
Not
yet.
yet, not yet, not yet.
So we're now really focusing on that literacy piece to ensure teachers know how to teach reading. Whatever that looks like, because I know there's a big debate right now. But I don't know if that helps. I was just thinking, like, when I was hearing you talk, like, you know, kind of narrowing it down, like trying to reframe the problem, like, what's your problem statement? What do you want your students to know in this lesson?
Okay, do we think the task that you were just looking through is reasonable to implement in a wide range of classroom settings?
No.
Tell me more.
I think yes.
I do too. I feel like it, but
Which task were you looking at?
I was looking at all of them.
For 2, the instruction piece, I think it lacks flexibility for all settings. Some of the candidates are going to be at a disadvantage, and it's shown in the data as well. Some of these things are just going to be more challenging depending on your context, your skill level, where, you know. So I think it lacks some of the flexibility that's needed in order to be more authentic. And then the questioning, because it's asking the educator to reflect on so much, it's not what you would be able to do in practice on a regular sustained level.
Just think of our different settings that we have in schools, whether you're in Southern California, in a large urban school district, or out there in the middle of nowhere, like where some places in Fresno County are Oakhurst, or these rural places up in the mountains. And know that, yeah.
Some of my teachers who are differently abled, trying to get around the classroom, or some folks with speech impediments, and like there's just a range of challenges that can make it hard to squeeze this stuff within that 15-minute clip. If there's commentary that, like, even you suggesting, like, oh, that's why some candidates will submit a second video because they couldn't squeeze it all in that 15 minutes. If that was like one of the commentary pieces, and we like the test itself says we understand that some of these things might be hard to show in 15 minutes. Some candidates have tried.
You could add another video here, kind of thing.
But would that be consistent with being applicable in multiple settings, or would that be something completely different? Because I'm just looking at the assessment overall, the way it's structured. I mean, I think the structure of it, you can say, okay, take this information, look at these prompts, and teach this in a first grade class in the inner city, teach this in a high school class in the suburbs, teach this, with this population of students. I think you can do that. I think it's flexible enough to do that. I think what you're referring to is not necessarily what that is asking, if it's flexible enough to be taught in multiple settings, unless I'm confusing what the question is.
The headings, like what has been like the promoting positive learning environment, engaging students in learning, deepening student learning during instruction, right? Those things can be applied in every single context. It's just the flexibility of having to demonstrate that within the 15-minute video clip. I believe different contexts, it can be more challenging for candidates depending on their own personal context and then where they're instructing to try to squeeze it all into that 15 minutes.
I think it all depends on the amount of support the candidate receives. So like, you guys heard Alan, I mean, our ed specialist has a 99% passing rate. So Riverside County and San Bernardino County, which we service, are very diverse. We have everything from rural districts to urban districts, and people are successful in all of those settings.
It's the support they get to.
It's the support they get.
So I put it in two different places. So I lifted the information you were saying about it being valid and authentic. I put the pieces about the video being a limitation, right? But then the reasonableness I put about candidates who are differently abled may have difficulty with some of the video requirements or the writing tasks. Did I capture that correctly?
I mean, I didn't mention necessarily the writing test. I was just saying that.
No, not you, but that came up
More
earlier, so.
Yeah, and the district, does the district require a certain type of lesson plan? So sometimes the candidates are in a more micromanaged setting where they have to teach a lesson a certain way.
As you're finishing up, can I actually share two things directly about that? Do you mind? I hate to insert myself into your group, but I appreciate it. We are, one of the other things that we're looking at is an enhancement. It's time to go. We're finished. It's literally time to go. We're done. Is instead of written commentaries, is allowing candidates to possibly submit audio recordings of themselves talking through their responses rather than a written commentary. So that was, one of the things that I thought of as you said that. And now the other thing that I was going to say has totally escaped me. I don't know what it was. It was something else you were just talking about.
In there?
It's not, that's not an option right now. That's in the redevelopment work.
It's in the redevelopment.
It's what we're planning. Yeah.
So that came from a recommendation, so I'm just.
Multiple sources of
Yeah.
different modalities of evidence.
I don't even know where this goes, but my main thought from as I'm sitting there thinking about how I would respond to the prompts, there's a significant amount of time it takes to craft the responses to those questions that I can imagine would be much more efficient and possibly more meaningful if I sat and had a conversation with an expert. I think that would be very quick, and we're so close.
Be a task class.
So I don't mean to say that it's an incredible time waster, but it seems like we're having the candidates spend a lot of time
Yes.
putting together these documents when they could have a 5-10 minute conversation with somebody else and go right back in and try it a different way. And their outcomes are both the same, right? And I don't know how we do that, but I guess my point just being, there's a lot of time being wasted on writing.
Yes, I
What
think
happened?
one of my biggest things is cutting all of the minimum pages in half, or like figuring out a way to make the responses more succinct in 1 or 2 sentences, as opposed to, oh, don't worry, you have 6 pages to elaborate on what you are trying to say, and at that point I'm just bullshitting the whole time and I'm putting in filler words when I could very right, and I could squeeze my academic language into 2 or 3 sentences as opposed to a page to reflect what I was intending to do in that lesson. But as a classroom teacher, that's not something I will ever have to do. But I also see the value in having to work those things out in your brain as a developing teacher, because you do have to think about those things and have conversations about those things, and you're not going to learn how to do them unless you're forced to do them and put into that situation. So I see the value of the academic language. It's just too much.
But I also wonder too, how much of this can be embedded in teacher prep programs
also that.
where the love case studies. I love case studies where there's a group discussing this is what happened in my classroom today, and round robin, everyone talks about experiencing this.
Yeah, it's all about the amount of support they get from their program.
All right, we're late.
Okay. It's Mandy's fault. They can yell at
My
her.
fault.
But we
They
got a
will.
lot of it.
You're wrong about that.
Devin, and see you on the other side. Yeah, we'll be there.
You there?
In the big room, Devin's doing.
Well, I think we did. Can we do anything to the screen though? Let's go to their, they have to go to their, but we don't turn it off, right?
I think the tech will come in and do, yeah, I think.
Oh, no.
We're not the only, we probably are.